The Soviet Deep Space Network got a signal from beyond on December 2, 1987. First picked up by the Galenki RT-70 radio telescope, it was shortly verified by additional system telescopes. Repeated daily for around 2 weeks, the signal emanated from the Kik 8462-852, currently more famously known as Tabby's star. About 1470 light-years from Earth, the F-type main sequence star is seen in the constellation Cygnus. Citizen scientists working under the Planet Hunters project found unusual light oscillations of the star, including up to a 22% dimming in brightness. These findings perplexed the scientific world, which still has to clarify what kind of natural event would produce such a significant brightness drop in a star. But my staff wasn't very surprised. Given the message and the nature of its content, we felt sure that some sort of artificial megastructure, such as a Dyson swarm, must have caused Tabby's star to fade. 2 datasets comprised the transmission. The first set was a mathematical blueprint of a big rectangular construction looking like a door frame, and the second set was a date sent to us using many images of our solar system, where the planet's orbits around the sun indicated the passage of time. It only took us a week to determine which date it was, November 18, 2019, but we were unable to ascertain what will happen on that date, but as you may most likely imagine by now, we know. We spent decades building the framework and almost lost our money multiple times, particularly following the fall of the Soviet Union. Still, we persisted steadily, slowly, but definitely. We then completed it about simultaneously with Tabby's star starting to show up in the media. From the midst of nowhere, our Siberian facility's massive doorway seemed majestic, a big portal. Apart from a hole at the top, it lacked any obvious characteristics. However, it consisted of billions of complex circuits, cooled to about 460 degrees, and ran on a small nuclear reactor. Not only because of the diluting refrigerators, but also the severe weather outside. Even if the entire facility felt as cold as Antarctica, I was still sweating as we were about to turn on the electricity for the first time. Nothing happened. We tried everything, but we couldn't get it to behave. For years, our only action was observation. Especially considering all the effort we had put into it, it was disheartening. Our final hope was the enigmatic date. Once it came to pass, everything changed. An object entered Earth's atmosphere above the Pacific Ocean Monday, November 19, 2019, around 2354 K. To the uncritical astronomers all around, it's like a little meteor. Better still, though, a Leidic-class submarine was sent with me on board, alongside the rest of the crew. The object descended Archipelago, an uninhabited island in the Auckland Islands, Disappointment Island. Not knowing what kind of alien item we would discover there, it felt strange walking ashore. We came around the hour of fading darkness, and the birds flocking the island, as if in nervousness, set off a spooky feeling crawling up my spine. Inside a crater, we discovered the object. About the size of a billiard ball, it was spherical and had the surface of the enormous building we had constructed in Siberia. Unlike her construction, though, this dark sphere was active. It took some time for us to realize, nevertheless, that its sole audible activity. "Quiet," I told the troops who had joined me on shore. "Speak." Sitting around the crater, none of us moved a muscle. Slower, dragging footsteps emanating from the sphere echoed back. If that makes sense, it sounded more like something truly happening right in front of us than like a recording. The footsteps stopped momentarily, then resumed till they vanished entirely. After that, at least as far as we could hear beneath the agitated birds on the windy island, a brave soldier offered to touch the sphere, making sure it was safe, and after that we carried it to the submarine. It seemed empty, not as weighty as it should have. Sitting next to the sphere, I listened attentively during our whole return to Russia. It was largely quiet, but occasionally I could hear the echo of something that brought back metal scrapping against metal. Though I was unable to clarify what I heard or by which means I could have heard it, it still seemed threatening and dark. Returning at the freezing facility, we immediately found that the sphere would fit exactly within the hole at the top of the structure, so missing all these years. The last fragment of our jigsaw. Though we all already know, my buddy and colleague Mitchett informed us it has been traversing space for more than 1,000 years. Alexander looked up at me from his wheelchair and said. I nodded. Fantastic. As our chief engineer, Sonia, remarked, alien footsteps from a millennium ago. Leader 1. I cleared my throat, breaking off her flow. I stared at my colleague's doubtful eyes and am not sure these sounds are recordings. As I said, there have thus far not been repetitions. Every sound we have heard is distinct, and several hours have gone by. What exactly are you trying to say? Anticipating an answer, outside his wildest imagining, Dmitri questioned. Are you implying, well, simply said, this is only a theory at best. Still, I believe we should take into account that the sound relates to the clear purpose of this black orb. As you all most certainly know, the construction is obviously designed to be a gateway, and this spherical component is most likely what will unlock the portal. What will link their world to our one? You mean this thing is already linked to Speaker 1? Sonia started without doing it through completion. I chewed my frozen lip anxiously, gathering ideas. If I had to estimate, it's entangled with an identical thing on the other side on a quantum level, somehow allowing us to hear what is happening 1,000 light years away in real time. And although we have no idea how, I do think the sphere will let us travel there via this entanglement. Maybe in an instant, if we were to drop it into the hole at the top of the building, we all sensed the weight of fate, maybe the fate of mankind on our shoulders. If this is accurate, Dmitri murmured, it implies both directions. Sonia spoke softly and with tremor. They are able to hear us. Leader 1. We next set up a soundproof chamber in which we placed the sphere together with microphones so that we might track its behavior free from human view. We started discussing what to do next as we investigated it, looking for as many hints as we could regarding what to expect on the other side. By now, the higher authorities in the Russian space forces and even the government had grown rather fascinated with our meager, underfunded team of engineers and researchers. They sent in generals, diplomats, and experts, all seeking their opinion on the question of future direction. Though I will not focus on the politics of it all, the scientific method was clearly the first victim of this debacle. Not only to learn as much as possible, but also to be safe. Hence, my team planned to examine the sphere for perhaps 2 years before placing it within the construction. Ultimately, even though we still only heard odd metallic scraping coming from the sphere, the generals, only concerned about their careers, wanted us to sit on this longer than a few months and decided on a very basic plan. Namely, to put the sphere in place, send in a probe, and then, if it looked safe, send a team through what we assumed to be a gateway. Though they disregarded our advice about hurrying things, they at least gave the possible threat enough thought to get ready in the manner we advised. We had no choice but to get ready for the worst with the strongest defense known to man, a thermonuclear missile, since we knew next to nothing about the entities who brought us this terror, save that they were thousands of times more evolved than us. It was frightening to see the PC-28-8 cat map rolled inside the building before the gateway opened. Should something hostile find its way from the other side, the bomb would go off and destroy everything within the vicinity. A crane raised the sphere to the top of the building in middle of June this year. Along with Dimitri and the rest of my squad, I stood at the floor shockingly close to the armed missile. I glanced at the young men assigned to set off it in the worst-case scenario nearby. Were they truly ready for death at their early age? I wondered myself. I then considered, if so, how courageous? If not, what stupidity is involved? While the general stood on an improvised observation deck some 100 meters distant, military guards with dogs encircled the structure. Originally from Roscosmos, the rover was the probe we meant to launch. Through the PA system, a female voice rang across the frigid facility. Although there might have been a way for us to prevent noise around the sphere, we hadn't had time since we had been told to complete the task rapidly. This meant that on the other side, everything mentioned on our side, including the directions conveyed over the speakers, could be heard. Said the least, it was risky. The spheres fit exactly in the opening at the top of the building as expected. Though we had no idea what to expect, everyone expected something. Every one of us fell silent. Though nothing happened, I dared not even breathe. We all thought for a second that something was off. The dogs started, then barking like savage creatures. It implied something had happened, while the hair on my neck stood on end. Simply said, we couldn't feel it. One of the dogs apparently managed to get loose and dashed for the entryway. Yelling for it to stay put, the soldier in charge went after, but it wouldn't listen. Then it disappeared after it passed the gateway. The facility echoed with a collective gasp, then a worried mumble. Of course the gateway was open. Did that dog pass across 1,000 light years? Dimitri inquired. For a few minutes, none said anything except fruitfully attempting to hear the dog across the sphere. One of the generals then addressed the speakers in the ceiling with great authority. Send through the probe. The rover disappeared, much as the dog would have. In tense expectancy, we all stared at the screens on the wall connected to the rover through a cable that suddenly seemed to hang in the air by itself. Nothing. The sphere crashed and then all went quiet once more. I stammered from nervousness. Though of course we could not know, we discussed what may have happened. It was hypothesized that the rover might have toppled over by mistake, and that this was considered as reality-based just on convenience. We then placed a camera on a metal bar, slid it into the portal, and 15 minutes later, at last we could see our first impression of what it looked like on the other side. Though none was identified, the extremely damaged recording clearly revealed a great wide expanse on the other side, much as if the camera had been exposed to some type of radiation. The terrain appeared too level to be natural, and distant shadows pointed to buildings. Nothing of what we observed provided any clue as to what had happened to the rover, and the dog was nowhere to be seen. I had to defend Dimitri's inclusion on the team that was finally chosen for Gateway Passage. The general in command assumed he would be a hindrance to the rest of the team since he was in a wheelchair, but I persuaded him his knowledge of exobiology was vitally vital. That did not fully reflect the truth. Dimitri had spent virtually his entire life working on our top-secret project, following the accident with the Soyuz TM-5 spacecraft that put him in the wheelchair. If my friend, who worked so hard, wasn't let to see the results of his own efforts, I would be damned, and therefore I gladly helped him inside the spacesuit. I responded with a smile on my normally weather-ravaged face. Now you'll be the cosmonaut you were always destined to be. Like we used to do years ago, we will create history together. For the motherland, he murmured and laughed himself into a coughing episode. I said later, thinking I needed a drink we will have had been due for it. Apart from my little team of scientists and myself, we were assigned help from a troop of very skilled commando frogmen. Their existence did not make me feel any more protected. We wouldn't have a chance whatsoever waited for us on the other side if they greeted us with animosity. We were nothing more than annoying ants marching in through the front door of a house incomprehensible to us. Standing in front of the big entryway all suited up greatly increased the sensation. A female choir sang the national anthem as salutations the generals on the observation deck. I murmured to Dmitri and rubbed his shoulder. All this beauty, only to hide how minuscule we are behind the old mysteries we are about to discover. The commando of next me had to fight in his spacesuit to produce the cross sign. I nodded at him and grinned, trying to give some hope. He had no need to know his gun would be ineffective. My own quick breathing, which told me how terrified I truly was, and the radio chatter, all I could hear in my helmet. Move ahead, eh? It was generally the case. He cleared his throat, then spoke softly, going forth. Make Russia and everyone else proud. I let out a long breath. Dmitri pushed his chair toward the portal with his hands grabbing its wheels. I hesitated for a moment, then turned to face the individuals behind me. It was virtually impossible for me to grasp that they would be almost 1,000 light years away from me in a few minutes. Member 2. Alexander, it's time. Speaker 1. Sonia stated. I assisted her in carrying an equipment-filled metal crate. Walking close to her made me feel somewhat more safe somehow. The intense warmth emanating from the frozen doorway was felt, even though the spacesuit shielded against the cold. My chilly breath fogged the gold helmet fastened on my visor. Each of us moved exactly in front of the unseen threshold. That minute seemed to last several hours. From behind the gateway, all I could see was the wall on the other side of the building. Not even the least vibration in the air. There were no visible signals at all. It made even more difficult to believe what was about to transpire. Not one person spoke. The commandos checked that their weapons were ready to go. I looked at Sonia, but under the visor, I couldn't see her face. Well then, Dmitri said at last. God hurry, friends. That became the unofficial go, and we crossed the line. The change went without a hitch. The only sign something had happened, a fracture in the radio cut off our access to Earth. For some reason, the radio signals failed to pass the gateway. We came upon a wonderful scene. A star passed across a partly cracked orange-tinged dome spanning the whole heavens. All black silhouettes against the rising sun, they were shone down on a gloomy and silent cityscape, dotted with towers taller than anything ever constructed on Earth. Tons of twisted metal and massive fragments of wrecked architecture drifted across space outside the dome. After seeing this, two things became instantly clear to us. Indeed, part of an attempted Dyson swarm. We were standing on a space platform big enough to allow for its own gravity. At some point between when the message was sent to Earth and now, their whole civilization was either abandoned or destroyed. Another massive platform emerged, blackly growing at the horizon like a black flower and throwing a massive hexagonal shadow over top of us. Unimaginable ancient forces, allowing a sunbeam to highlight the scene in front of us, tore it apart in the middle. From the portal, big steps descended, and the rover we had dispatched slammed on the earth under them. Surrounded by identical gateways, the gateway stood at the edge of a big oval square, signifying that the people who created this civilization had sent forth countless signals to the stars and patiently awaited responses. Pressurized and oxygen-rich, the dog began sprinting at us from the platform. Though we had no idea what other gases, maybe even diseases, might have lingered in the environment, removing our helmets was not out of question. Sonia and I accompanied Dmitri down the steps, then looked at the rover. As we expected, it had obviously dropped down the steps. Nevertheless, we also couldn't explain a series of tiny holes on its side. When the dog came upon us, it wagged its tail. One of the commanders dropped down to touch it on its head. He turned to check her tag. "Good girl," he remarked, laughing. "She go by Aliana, a real hero." "This area makes me feel horrible," Dimitri said. "In other words, what happened here?" 2 speakers. Each one of these portals only waiting to link to some far-off planet. First speaker. "Look," I remarked, and gestured toward one of the gates at the opposite side of the square. That one seems to have been blown apart. She is broken, almost. The scientific curiosity kept me going, even if my gut instinct and unsettling hint of anxiety advised me to avoid this forsaken location and go back to Earth. Indeed, the doorway was in ruins, and from what one could see, it was the outcome of an explosion. Turning back toward our own gateway, incognito among the others. Should something happen to it, I considered, we would be stuck farther from home than any other people in human history. Alexander is Dimitri's voice came through my helmet. Few hundred meters separated him from me. "Please review them. Huge, apparently fossilized bones were strewn all over the ground." While the commandos guarded the area, Sonia helped us gather some of the smaller bits, just as if they had been coated in maggots at some point, and hundreds of tiny holes covered the brittle relics. I remarked, and gestured to a piece as big as a boulder, looking like part of a skull. "How amazing," I said, anon. "How shockingly interesting." "Its dimensions could help to explain why the gateways are so big," Dimitri remarked. "Their point of reference might have been their own size?" Second speaker. "I propose a theory. These all gates must have been created to reach perhaps sophisticated worlds, but this one specifically." Speaker 1. "You do not believe it simply crumbled over time due to natural events?" I probed. Second speaker. Speaker 1 mentioned maybe they invited something unpleasant, something stronger than the entities that created all of this, Dimitri asked. I inhaled deeply and shappily. If so, then the issue becomes what happened to the people who wrecked them. Dimitri kept on, shivering my spine. 2 speakers. "Perhaps we ought to get back and..." First speaker. The commandos cried at us to move behind them, interrupting Sonia. From one of the wide, barren streets heading to the square, a man as tall as a building emerged. It staggered toward us, gradually entering the light. I knew it was the source of the footfall I heard emanating from the sphere on Disappointment Island, just by looking at how slow it moved. Its thin gray body was dotted with bleeding holes. Its enormous skull, with 10 or more tiny eyes spanning the whole face, matched the fossils we had seen on the ground. Not lips or nose, only unblinking eyes. It seemed as though it intended to shoo us away with its extended arms, but it was hard to tell if there was any aggressiveness underlying it. "Father of God," Dimitri declared. "This is not appropriate. Alexander, kindly let me back you." The dog started to bark fiercely, and the commandos got ready to launch from pure fright. I grabbed Dimitri's wheelchair and told everyone to get back to our gateway, but just before we could move, the alien being crushed forward. As it touched the earth, it sent a cloud of dust skyward. We watched its apparently lifeless body silently for a few minutes. My pulse was felt in my temples. My heart was pounding. We felt a resonance of something big dropping to the earth far away. The uncomfortable sense of earlier became dread, coupled with the amazing awareness of being observed. The lifeless body started to move suddenly, then our terrified screams followed as critters started to flee by the holes in its skin and even through its many eye sockets. The terrible picture that passed before us is difficult to articulate. These critters looked like big black centipedes. One of them, the biggest one, drove itself out of the mouth of the body, and it was at that repressive action that commandos fired. Running in the spacesuits seemed like running in a dream where you never gathered up speed no matter how hard you tried. It was also more or less impossible. The arthropodicy beast swarmed right at us. One of the lesser ones crawled inside the commando suit. From one of his eyes, I saw watch it pass his mouth and then begin to eat. A larger one tore off another commando's visor, using his spine still connected, so severing his skull. Knowing that only nuclear eradication awaited us on the other side, I did not run to save my life, not even to save the life of a buddy. I rushed to spare the people of this planet from the same destiny that had befallen them. From their hiding places inside the gloomy metropolis, even bigger animals, as enormous as trains, started to show. Running ahead of all of us, the dog arrived first at the gateway. Just as I was ready to pull Dimitri's wheelchair up the steps, it toppled over. Some of the animals passed by us, clearly more focused on crossing the doorway than on murdering us. I slanted down to grab Dimitri's hand. Running up to assist Dimitri back into his wheelchair, Sonia. More and more species passed through the doorway. No sign of the warhead being set off emerged. Why have they not exploded the nuclear weapon? Inquired. I smashed my visor against the ground and yelled toward the sphere as loud as I could, since there was no way to unlock the visor and there was not time to take off the helmet. Bust it, you fucking cowards, blow it up. Sonia assisted me in pulling Dimitri's wheelchair up the steps. Let me stay here, Dimitri pleaded. I just closed up and said, I am not leaving these abominations with you. 2 commandos passed by just now. One passed through the doorway. Then, moments later, his headless body was sent back through it once more. Then Sonia shrieked and released the wheelchair. I nearly let it drop. Desperate to remove her helmet, she reached for it with her hands, but there was no time. She vomited uncontrollably till she dropped down the steps. The thing ate its way in through her eye and carried on into her brain. I made it across the gateway with Dimitri, a miracle. I could not even adequately explain the anarchy we encountered. The choir's women were being pulled apart. Naively trying to hit the animals, the guards were firing at one another. Most likely, the soldiers running the missile disappeared from their place as soon as the first centipede showed through the portal. Apart from 1 or 2 that were dead on the ground, the generals were nowhere to be seen either. It was easy to find where they were, though, as helicopters were flying outside. As I zigzagged across the chaos, dragging Dimitri in front of me, my glass visor was cutting my chest underneath the suit. Still audible to me in my helmet on the radio is him. Leave me by the rocket, he advised. You were talking about what, though I knew beforehand? I asked. Speaker 3, neither of us should be staying here. Leader 1. He kept on. Alexander, keep yourself safe. Should we be successful, none of us could leave this place. I said, that sums up the whole argument. Try. Dimitri added, you are able to stroll. I'm not sure. Not knowing what to say, I paused by the missile. Dimitri advised me to give you some time unless they got very near to me. Not time for a farewell with sentimentality, pal. Just keep running. And I did, with shame clouds distorting my view. I made it inside one of the helicopters about ready for takeoff. Sitting in it with her small son, who must have been brought to the institution against policy only to let him see history being created, was a wife of one of the generals. He appeared shell-shocked, but the dog laying on the floor under his legs helped him to relax. I added, trying to grin as the helicopter took off, you saved her. You young man are a hero. Real hero. As we ascended to the heavens, the facility shrank under us. The more away we became, the more concerned I became about one of the creatures finding Dimitri. Then, perhaps 1.5 kilometers away, the bright light from the nuclear explosion overwhelmed us. After that, I recall not much. We must have been rather affected by the shockwave. I woke up in Omacan, a rural area. They informed me that one of the valleys next to the town had the wrecked chopper. While the mother and the pilot hadn't, the boy and the dog had survived. Though other than them, no one would have been able to notice the explosion given its remote location. The locals hadn't seen the mushroom cloud. Still, later on, Scandinavia was seen to show rising radiation levels. The government naturally remained silent about the cause, and I honestly believed that all would return to normal and that we had prevented the annihilation of every living creature on Earth. However, last week I discovered Eliana had passed away. One of her eyes vanished, apparently.